Welcome to the launch of the 2025 Footprint Sustainability Index in association with Nestlé Professional. I am delighted to be able to share the report with you. It draws on insights generously shared by industry leaders across the hospitality and food service spectrum. We also do lots of consumer research with our partners Viper, and we draw on a wider industry analysis to really make sure we have got the insight, the evidence, the practical examples to help you set priorities and strategy and to make change happen. So today, what we're going to do is I'm going to start with a quick overview of the report and some of the key findings and some of the great stats that we've got and nuggets of insight. Then we're going to have an amazing panel with Julia Jones, who's the head of sustainability and corporate communications at Nestlé Professional, Dave Gudgeon, the head of external affairs at Economy Connect, and Emily Pinkney, the sustainability manager at Cisco GB. So it's going to be a really great session, and I really look forward to getting into it all with you. So the really amazing thing about doing this index every year is how you can really see the industry evolving. And one of the really wonderful things that come really to the fore is how sustainability is so part of the DNA in so many hospitality and food service organisations now. And this is really brilliant because what we are seeing with the citizens is that almost a third now expect cafes, restaurants and fast food chains to reduce the environmental impact of their food. The link between food, climate and business is really well established for citizens. So they expect people to be doing things in this space. And if it's not happening, they're going to be very disappointed. And this is really, and this consumer desire for sustainability within business is really important because obviously there's been really turbulent headwinds around environmental social governance in the last sort of 12 months. And our interviews with industry leaders really was really heartening because it found that despite all these geopolitical pressures, the businesses are still highly focused on ESG. And our research really chimed with what's going on in the wider economy. There's an Ipsos report that came out recently that found, which is across the whole economy, not just hospitality and food service, and that found that sustainability remains really critical to corporate strategy. So I can hear an echo. I hope it's not me. So long-term strategically, sustainability makes sense, and that's absolutely why all the people that we spoke to were telling us that they were prioritizing it. And people were giving examples of core crop availability being impacted. So barley, for example, in brewing, they talked about net zero regulation risks, investment risks, and also the pressure from investments. There's a new stat that came out from Deloitte, which said that 79% of global investments have global investors have sustainable investment policies, and that's sort of 4 times the amount that there were 5 years ago. So as Bob Gordon at Zero Carbon Forest said, which is quoted in the report, smart investors are realizing the weather's changing. If I invest in a business that isn't ready, it's a poor investment. But obviously, with all this politically precarious times, there was a sense from our research and the interviewees that people really needed to embed sustainability into strategy to make sure it could weather these wins. So that meant most often making it part of everyone's job role so that it was really embedded. And also that has the knock-on effect that it makes it really real to people, really actionable, and really makes the business much more powerful. And there's lots of great examples of that, which we'll touch upon earlier about ingredients and looking at the footprints of menus. There are some areas that have been a bit more impacted. So perhaps diversity, equity and inclusion has been more impacted. But people are still recognizing the long-term value of these things, but they're just maybe not making as much noise about them. Another thing that came up in this section was that there is a real, that sustainability organizations are under so much pressure now with the increased raft of regulation. The EU deforestation regulation was listed as a particular headache. Also, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive all these requirements were sort of threatening to overwhelm teams and prevent them from focusing on action. But so people are really sort of struggling to navigate that and looking for all the support and help that they can get. But most people welcomed all this regulation because it will ultimately level the playing field. And once the systems are in place, it will enable people to also demonstrate exactly what they're doing and show their competitive advantage. Now, this year, the index, we had to include a technology and data section because obviously, whatever the question at the moment, the answer is AI. It's a massive overgeneralization, of course, but it is absolutely, AI and technology is absolutely transforming hospitality and food service on the ground today. So there's obviously some really sort of amazing and wacky things out there, like robot waiters, and using AI to design menus and look at food trends. So we thought it would be really interesting to find out what consumers think about AI. So interestingly, they don't surmise so much about a bit of support in designing menus. So 53% said they would accept an AI designed meal. And a surprising 43% said they wouldn't mind being served by a robot. But interestingly, over 50% also said they preferred hospitality to say human. And it's an interesting balance between, that vital social role as social glue that hospitality provides, and also making efficiencies. So we there are two main, there's loads, this section is massive. I haven't listed all of the insights here because there's too much to read, but these are a few that we'll touch on. But the two main areas of major transformation is around the menu development side of things. And this has been something that's been happening for a while, and it's really taken hold in the last year. People are using AI tools and technical tools to instantly work out what the environmental impact is of swapping in and out of ingredients of recipes and the nutritional impacts. And really, this is giving chefs the power to really understand their impact and tweak menus to as a result. And that's really driving the shift to plant-rich options. As ever, this is particularly led by those in the contract catering space, and we'll have some examples of those later. But it's also lots is happening in the casual dining space, which is really heartening to see. For example, Ask Italian's got a commitment to have a 65% of the menu be low carbon by 2030, and introducing the wild farm dough has reduced the footprint. The dough's footprint by 50%. And then there's another example of like Eurest. They did a lasagna, which I think was 52 to 48 meat to lentils. And that massively reduced the environmental impact, massively reduced the fat, but also increased the fiber and the protein, two elements of the, fiber in particular is an element of the diet that people really don't have. Another area that people were really, really excited about in terms of AI is the data collection and reporting, because we've talked about the fact that the people are under this enormous pressure, so much data to gather on the whole supply chain. This will hopefully mean people, once those systems are in place and data can be moved along the system, and everyone starts maybe adopting the same systems, it can really dramatically reduce that compliance load. However, of course, there is quite a lot of concern that with data centres and transmission being 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and AI takes up between 10 to 28% of that, depending on where you look, this does need to be introduced really carefully, and we need to make sure that things around data privacy and energy need to store data and do computational power are really considered and addressed. The next section, delivering sustainable diets. And what's really interesting here is that as sort of sustainable diets and low carbon diets have become more established, we had a slight dip in the number of people overall who said that they tried to reduce the amount of meat they'd eaten. So we went to 54 from 58% last year. But interestingly, for the really HAFS-focused Gen Z kind of demographic, we've still got 61% of that demographic saying they've tried to limit or reduce the amount of meat they eat. That demographic, Gen Z, DIN up sort of typically 3 times a month, or 53% of Gen Z dine out 3 times a month, and 15% do 5 times or more. So it is really a key demographic for HAFs. And this is one of the reasons that we had people like Julia Jones, who we'll hear from later. She said in the report, we're very focused on transforming the food system, taking a holistic approach, encompassing sustainability, nutrition, innovation, and responsible marketing. One of the things that came through again and again was the fact that, climate change is no longer feeling like a distant threat. There's floods, there's fires, there's droughts. It's happening now. Without, people, when we interviewed them, people said, without investment in resilient farms and agricultural systems, it will only get worse, and we won't have those core commodities we need to produce our products and have our businesses. So the sustainable sourcing is really shifting from niche to necessary, and it's becoming really normal with movements such as Groundswell and Riverford Organic and Wild Farm and Hotbed. They're appearing on menus, not Groundswell obviously, but that annual farming event is becoming more and more high profile. And these are really increasing the adoption of sustainably farmed ingredients. And what's wonderful is that there's been an amazing response to many of these reformulated dishes. So there was a Compass superfood burger, which was 50% beef, 25% lentils, and 25% black beans. And that increased the fibre 20-fold. And the response to it was absolutely kind of off the chart. They're now launching a meatball concept, but it's the same way with Benugo's blended burger. People like Oaxaca, who would have heard of before in footprint reports, but they have also looked at things like incorporating better carcass utilization, changing their menus, and they've done all these different things. So now they've got different cuts that allows them to go down from 420 animals per week, which to supply their beef needs, to 10. And switching to grassroots, which is a regeneratively sourced beef, has also reduced their emissions. So overall, they've reduced their beef emissions by nearly 60% since 2020. So there's a lot that's happening on the ground in the hospitality and food service. One of the problems and the challenges in this space is that there are not clear definitions around what is meant by regenerative farming, and there's lots of different kind of terms being used. And there's a hilarious anecdote from BBC Food and Farming about this agriculturist called Ken Giller, who was at a conference in 2019, and everybody in the room, all the industry, were talking about regenerative farming, and he, as the only agriculturist, didn't know what it was meant. And so he actually did a white paper on what it meant, and then afterwards a corporate came to him and said, "We've committed $3 billion to this program. Can you help us work out what it means?" So that there's a lot of confusion around it. People are using the term, but there's not a universal understanding. There also, our interviewees also stressed the importance of not just looking at countrywide data. They were saying it's very important to look at your own suppliers and see what impacts they're having from drought, from floods, from specific climate-related events, to make sure you mitigate for that. Another really big thing in this space was the low, no alcohol opportunity, which is again, continuing to gain momentum. Our survey found that 68% of consumers would choose a low or no alcohol drink instead of an alcoholic drink, sometimes or often. So that's really increasing, and that's showing this movement. UK sales have nearly doubled since 2022. And the UK is the 8th biggest global market. So again, catering to that is really important. Moving on to attracting and retaining customers and clients, we have found that this had a big jump when we put two identical restaurants, when we put a commitment to net zero in that signage. 56% would choose the restaurant with a carbon net zero commitment, and that rose to 63% for that important Gen Z demographic. So there's a lot going on in this space, but we also found that a lot of people, again, we had a decent jump in the people who would choose the lower carbon lasagna over the standard traditional lasagna. So it really shows how sustainability is factoring in consumers' decision-making process. And this is aligned with the 2025 Consumer Sustainability Report, which found that 84% of people are making changes to lead a more sustainable lifestyle, and over half say that a brand sustainability practices influence their purchasing decisions. So it's really important that the work that's being done, that effective communication happens and is critical. We did some research at Footprint and discovered that people, were very interested in many different criteria. So people would choose a dish. So 40% would opt for a dish that had a welfare claim over one that didn't. When you made those claims really benefit-led, concise and impactful, so you'd say something like amazing taste, higher welfare, same cake price, 67% would choose that one over a straightforward welfare claim. So again, it's not just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. So crafting those stories, showing those supplier strategies. And we know that people are having real success in, educating their servers on the ground. So when they're talking to customers, they can tell them, Gaucho's doing it, this is what's happening with our grasses, with our beef, and customers are really engaging with that. In the addressing food packaging and other waste section, across all of the waste, there was so this is quite exciting. Normally you don't want your stats to go down, but it was quite good that this stat went down, and that was sort of the inference is that is because the people, all the legislation has come in around single-use plastic, so people now feel that this is something they don't have to worry about. They don't have to choose a place to eat because it's tackling waste, because they know that it's happening behind the scenes and that the legislation is doing that job. It's still higher amongst Gen Z diners, about 36, but it's also gone down. It was 46% for them last year. But of course, with this sort of assumption that the good things are happening, it's even more important that we exceed those expectations and don't let things slip. When it comes to food waste, there is lots of great stuff going on in this. People are using food saving to connect with customers and teams, talking about specials and how they're utilizing surpluses or, additional things and really having a lot of success from that. In that, there's a big shift about food waste measurement is becoming a lot more common, and a lot of it's being shifted to being incorporated into existing operating systems that sites are already using. So it's just a routine thing that people are inputting along with, all their other P&L information and menu management and ingredients and ordering. We also have AI being more routinely adopted. This is becoming more and more evolved. BM has got a new system that works like Amazon checkouts. Apparently, all you do is place it under the scanner and it works out everything else, what it is, and then gives you the breakdown of the carbon and cost. We also have a lot of stuff happening up the supply chain. Things like the Wonky Collective, which has been rebranded as Zest now. They are helping to connect people up the supply chain, to matchmake in the background to business. There's also some great work, great kind of momentum happening on the consumer side. So we obviously have, things like Olio and Too Good To Go doing redistribution, but things that, the business operators are now overcoming those hot food and security fears. So a lot of the time in the past, people didn't want to get involved. They worried about food safety, or they worried about prisons, schools, film sets, security fear concerns. But what's really exciting is things like dancing on ice and things are embracing this, and the people in industries like the film industry move from site to site, so they are taking those the innovations with them across different sets. And when also within the public sector, when one operator introduces a redistribution system like an Olio, it can then goes across 20 sites at once. So this is a really growing sector, and it's great to see that fear being overcome. We also have packaging waste. We're going to talk about this later. Dave is a bit of a massive expert, but again, these scalable, sustainable solutions are really showing what's possible. Notpla and Levy, their partnership, Notpla is a sort of seaweed-based film. That's their partnership with Levy is cutting emissions by 70%, and that's now rolled out to about 50 major venues. We've got circular systems like Bid Foods introduced four-door delivery cages to reduce all the plastic wrap, recycling boxes for workwear, and EU and Eurest and ISS have reduced things like reusable trays for pre-prepared meals or closed-loop recycling systems. We've also got reusables doing really well. People like CH&Co are even launching their own schemes when off the shelf didn't work. So people are really innovating in all of these spaces. When it comes to saving energy and natural resources, protecting natural resources. I can't talk. There's a couple of things that were kind of vying for the moniker of being the new carbon, but biodiversity is one of them. Our research found that 40% of UK adults are really worried about the decline of nature, and within industry, there's a lot of action happening in this space. We've discussed some of that in the sustainable farming section, but of course, a task force on nature-related financial disclosures is driving this as well. But there's so much work happening in this space, and it's really important that it is. There's also lots of work continuing to electrify sites and operations, and to include in rolling out more induction, renewable energy providers, heat recovery, battery and solar systems, and overnight savings. It's all happening. Like I said, the action on water finally is gaining momentum. People who read the report every year will know I'm always banging on about water and that it's not getting enough of a high profile. But things like RAPS, water roadmap, with 100 organisations committed, things that are in the background helping to change this. And we'll get some great examples from the panel later on that. The last section on staff health and wellbeing, encouraging creativity, boosting inclusivity, and fostering wellbeing. It was so clear, speaking to all the people across the industry. All the research shows this quote from Bob sums it up: if you want to hire the best people in the industry, you've got to be a responsible business. 36% saying doing the right thing for people and planet is a priority in their employer. We also found that so people are increasingly using sustainability and well-being to attract staff and retain talent. And while things like a good work-life balance are really important, so 66 people said that was important, good hours, 65% location, 55%. Things like looking after work or mental health is a massive priority trait. 48% said that was a priority. And when you think that 40% of hospitality and food services turnover relates to mental health, according to Burnt Chef, and that you get a £4 return for every pound spent, it's really, really important. What also came through is the fact that it can be a bit challenging at the moment in the sustainability space because of the wider kind of crises. So again, providing that moral support and sort of, Mike Hansen is quoted in the report saying you need to be an angry optimist. You need to make sure that you're helping people. Also really making sure that people understand what they're doing in their job role in every single part of the business. So people like Compass and Fuller's are embedding it into the daily process, and also sort of sharing 2-minute videos, QR codes, 1-page briefs, this kind of thing, that are quick, instant, and share with each team member exactly what their impact is and how they can make a difference. As Ollie Rosevear from Fuller's said, we're trying to normalise sustainability. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the index. There's tons more in there for you to look at your leisure, but we're going to dig into some of this now with our fabulous panel. So please, can I welcome the lovely Julia Jones from Nestlé Professional, Dave Gudgeon from Reconomy Connect, and Emily Pinkney from Cisco GB. It's so fabulous to have you guys with me today. Just to kick off, so I mentioned obviously that the research interviews revealed how the industry is still prioritising ESG despite the turbulence. And one of the reasons that came up repeatedly was that ESG is becoming central to tenders, with clients asking for data to demonstrate, ability to meet commitments. Julia, would you like to just give us some thoughts from your perspective about why ESG is still a major priority to organisations like Nestlé?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amy. And you touched on this right at the very beginning of your presentation. I think the first thing is that fundamentally it is a core component of our business strategy. We have a responsibility to play a part in addressing the global climate-related challenges that we're facing. So it's not only the right thing to do, but it's about our business resilience as well. So as you touched on, we're seeing rising temperatures and drought, which put crops at risk. We need those crops for our products. I'm sure many are going to be very aware, about the risks on so coffee and cocoa supply, for instance. We've got escalating prices. In the last 5 years, I mean, coffee has gone up like 3.5 to 4 times, cocoa gone up 5 times in price. So you can't ignore sustainability and ESG. It's about that business resilience, it's about risk management, and it is very much part of our long-term business strategy. Coupled with that, the consumer, they expect companies to operate responsibly and transparently. And then, as you touched on as well, regulations increasing. And like others at Nestlé, we're very supportive of well-designed regulation. It's an enabler for us to meet our targets and helps us be compliant and mitigate risks. So yeah, hopefully that gives sort of some of a flavour of why it is such a sort of major priority for us.
Thank you, Julia. So obviously I mentioned that people literally told me that they felt they were drowning in regulation. And we spoke to Dominic Watts, who's a partner at DWF Law, and he recommended really strongly like engaging early and proactively with regulators, making sure you dedicated sufficient time and staff and communicating transparently, and in collaborating across the industry. But actually the increase in regulation was one of the reasons why this year, for the first time, we've included a list of regulations, both in the packaging space, but also in the kind of wider across the whole sustainability sphere space, to provide a bit of a crib sheet to help people get their heads around what's coming and when. But people actually interestingly said that organisations like the Sustainable Restaurant Association, Zero Carbon Forum, and like Footprint are really helping to kind of help bring people together and collaborate and explain challenging to navigate these challenging waters. And also a really interesting point came from Mike Hansen, who said, WSH, who said that they were able to also be a trusted advisor to their clients, which was, put them in a place to help people and build that relationship too. Dave, you speak to clients across the industry. I mean, how are they handling it? What are you seeing?
Yeah, look, I'm not gonna lie. It's not easy to find the time and the space that you need to try and get your head around this endless list of regulations that it can feel like at times. And let's be honest, I think when almost any of us start to read through these things, it can feel overly complex and incredibly overwhelming. But the truth is that there's a really simple answer in it, and you've touched on it. It's about communication. For the food service and hospitality sector, they look at each other. They look to experts like Dominic and the team at DWF Law, to Emily and the team at Cisco GB. They look to businesses like us at Reconomy for support as well. And for our clients, what we hear and what we see at the moment is that they want us to be offering, webinars, forums, sit down face to face and actually just talk things through. So my advice to people is always, get involved in responding to government consultations. Look out for the published responses to those consultations, because by doing this, our clients ultimately give themselves a longer lead time to prepare for change. And you've mentioned SRA, Sustainable Restaurant Association, Bob and Mark at the Zero Carbon Forum and the team there, and of course yourselves at Footprint. I was with Marston's 2 weeks ago. I was actually with the Zero group last night, and actually both have said the same thing really, which is that the value that they get from sharing knowledge through these types of platforms is absolutely priceless for them. The challenge that regulation brings isn't, the exclusive issue for any one business. Share your problems, share the solutions, share best practice. And it's a massively powerful tool. Most of the changes we're seeing at the moment, whether it's simpler recycling in England, extended producer responsibility, or the deposit return scheme that's going to be coming in, the fact is that we should be looking at how businesses in other countries as well are already handling pretty similar regulation, because it's an awful lot we can learn by looking a little bit further afield. So for clients that we're working with to kind of embrace this mindset, navigating their way through regulation and legislation, it feels maybe slightly less painful. Let's put it that way.
Well, that is very good to hear. Emily, I know you've been navigating this as well, and this fine balance between reporting and taking action. So how are you managing to still prioritize action?
Yeah, it is a really hard balance. And I think the tides feels like it's shifting slightly now, where I think for the last 12, 18 months, where probably things like legislation coming down the line was something that people were worried about. And, you already had things like TCFD in the UK, where you needed to get a really good handle of your data and your risk, was kind of driving this ambition for perfect data, and especially when it came to carbon footprints of product and food. And I think ultimately, food supply chains are super complex, and the data is getting more mature as time goes on. And I think there's a bit of a recognition now that let's let that go on and happen. And actually, as business, what can we do to really impact those areas that will drive change? And there is a real appetite for that now, in terms of, I'm having more conversations with customers now in terms of what are the projects that we can collaborate on versus give me a product carbon footprint for every item in my basket that I'm buying for you. Because, different types of food would be different places and different kind of maturity of products. And even, larger businesses will be much better set up for having that data and having those conversations versus, some of the small local growers that we're buying from in our fresh produce business do not have the resource or the budget to go and get an LCA for the onions that they're selling, as an example. So I think it's just being really open and honest about the reality of what level data is at, and just, I guess, giving the assurance that, we're on a journey of improving our data and onboarding these various tech and AI platforms to help us navigate that. So it will get better, but I think ultimately those stories of really driving change and progress, really the way that we keep capturing hearts and minds in the business and with our customers and within the consumers. Because otherwise, if it's all just stats and carbon reduction, it doesn't feel real. It can all feel quite data heavy.
What was quite interesting is that, in the technology and AI chapter, we kind of looked at how tech is already enabling farmers to track the carbon savings of regenerative agriculture, which means they can demonstrate and quantify and fund, therefore, and certify their value. You mentioned when we spoke about how this kind of ability to quantify the carbon savings was really kind of changing the dialogue around ingredients, a lower carbon ingredients like a wild farm flour or grassroots beef. What are you seeing? How is this translating to sales? Does it make customers more willing to pay for those sustainable ingredients?
Yeah, I think if they can show the why behind some of those and kind of maybe potentially more expensive products and be really clear in that. And I mean, I think with certain customers, they'll have their hero products where it makes a lot of sense for them to invest in a more sustainable option. Like an Italian restaurant investing in the dough, it makes sense, and making sure that they're really sharing that story. And I think something that we're really looking at in GB now is actually surprisingly taking a bit of a lead from our US colleagues, because over in Cisco US, they brought together a more sustainable product range, and it's actually performing 3 times quicker and better than the normal range. And that's just through really clear communication on the website to say, we put this in a more sustainable range. This is the criteria that this product has to hit in order to be in this range and be advertised. And that's really resonating with people. And, especially with the independent customer market, obviously we talk a lot about contract caterers and large chains. Those independent customers that don't have a sustainability manager and they don't have maybe the full understanding, because it's impossible to understand all of these product certifications and what's better and what's not. Having someone to be able to guide them to say, self-serve, go to this range. Okay, I want to maybe spend a bit more on this because I feel that's really important to me and that will resonate with my customers. I think it's going to be but more and more so about really, really clear, tangible, obviously considering greenwashing and all of this. But what is the story behind some of these products, and why is it more sustainable, and therefore why should they pay that extra money? I think that's what we'll also kind of see changing, because it's all been maybe hidden behind the data up until now.
That's amazing. Thank you, Emily. And obviously that chapter, there's the Bella robot at the restaurant in Cosmo, one of the more kind of light-hearted applications of AI. There's also some kind of more practical examples. There's Aramark's they're sort of introducing frictionless stores. They've got one that they're trialing at Legoland, so you can sort of so they're kind of like the Amazon Fresh type system. And there's some interesting things that could come out of that. That they might help with waste reduction, because it will have more accurate stock control potentially, and maybe reduce the emissions related to staff. But again, that whole hospitality and the touch points and the human connection. It'll be interesting to see where some of this lands. There's also some interesting work happening that came up in the research around transforming true food trends. So, for example, AI is being used to track trends like salty and spicy, and it can also it can passively analyze these trends and tell businesses like Waitrose did a lot of research in this area, what's happening. But it can also be used to brainstorm and new concept ideas. So there's also a big exciting potential to proactively direct and drive food trends in the sustainable space. Sort of moving towards sustainable diets, because this is sort of in that space. You've been talking, Emily, about the farmers being increasingly aware of the climate challenges, and more are coming on board towards sustainable farming practices as the benefits become apparent. Dave, we touched on some of the wild farm flower story there, and your, Azuri, the work they're doing. Does this make you think that things like regenerative agriculture will become the norm for businesses? Is there a strong enough business case?
Yeah, look, so I think the term itself, regenerative agriculture, I think it's a marketeer's dream, because actually most consumers haven't really got a clue what it means, but it sounds really good, right? So I think, I think if we're going to try and make it the norm, it's a bit like the QE2. It's really slow to accelerate and to pick up pace. It takes what feels like forever to try and turn the ship around. And I remember Gypsy Hill Brewery winning the Sustainable Use of Raw Materials Award at last year's Drink Sustainability Awards. And they use wild farmed barley in their brewing process. So someone else on that very same evening spoke to me and said, actually, look, for larger breweries, trying to replicate Gypsy Hill, it's going to take an awful lot longer. As far as Azuri is concerned, well, the Ask Italian brand's the first national chain to kind of go to market with a pizza that's using 100% wild farm flour. So they're kind of proving that regen agriculture, it can be done at scale, it can become a norm. But if we're looking at kind of land management on farms, then I think that the truth is that we need to look at less intensive, obviously less destructive farming solutions. And I think that businesses kind of en masse need to begin to offer the assurance and the certainty to farmers that it's not just a fad for today and then it's gone tomorrow, because then the farming sector, I think, would gladly accelerate and scale up the pace of their transition. I think if we can do that, then there's no reason to believe that regen agriculture couldn't be the norm within 5 years.
That's a really good point, Dave. Thank you. And Julia, I know Nestlé has made many commitments to regenerative practices. Can you talk us through some of the top line commitments and explain, what the benefits are on the ground, like why Nestlé is committing to them and why your farmers are happy to commit to them too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Certainly at Nestlé, we really want to be known for our work in regenerative agriculture. And in the UK, for instance, we've got a 10-year history of working with farmers on regenerative practices. We have got bold commitments on this. So we aim to source 50% of our key ingredients from farmers adopting regenerative practices by 2030. And actually, we set a 2025 milestone as well, which we've exceeded. So 21.3% of our ingredients are from farmers adopting those practices. So that's in terms of the commitments. And then in terms of the benefits, it's the whole benefit on soil health, which can enable capturing that carbon to contribute to net zero goals. That improved soil health will then enhance the water retention, reduce the runoff. You can have economic benefits for farmers through reduced input costs, like chemical fertilizers, and then for the local economy. So if I take a couple of examples, one locally, so our partnership with First Milk on our dairy. So we're working with over 80 dairy farmers in Cumbria and Ayrshire. And working on these regenerative practices has been for over 10 years now. And obviously it started, slower, and it's been, increasing over the years. And now we're in this real, massive partnership position on it, really supporting those farmers. So the other thing which is really interesting is that those farms are then local to our Dalston factory, which is where we're making our Nescafe frothy coffees, and also to Given in Scotland, where the milk is then turned into a chocolate crumb from our confectionery. Those ingredients will then go to York and Halifax, where KitKat and other confectionery are made. So fundamentally, it's farming with the regenerative practices, which will benefit, in the environmental and also the ingredients, but also for that local economy, because you've got the pound staying in the local economy. And then if I then touch on a sort of further afield, so with coffee, with our Nescafe Plan 2030. So in fact, just yesterday afternoon, the progress report for 2024 was announced, which puts a couple of the stats in the report a little bit out of date now, but that's fine. So we've trained 20,000 coffee farmers in regenerative practices. So it really is becoming, at scale. 32% of that green coffee is sourced from farmers implementing regenerative practices. And we are really starting to see a compelling case for regenerative. So it really aims to increase those yields in the long term. And we're starting to see a strong potential uplift in farmer coffee income, along with greenhouse gas reduction in those farms that have been assessed. So yeah, there's lots of benefits on this, and I firmly believe as well that regenerative agriculture will become scaled, and it fundamentally aligns with net zero targets, aligns with our customers' net zero or net zero and decarbonisation targets, and it helps future-proof the food system, and coming back to that business resilience as well, organisations too.
Amazing, thank you. And Emily, you're often closer to suppliers than many operators are. It'd be interesting to see. I know that you mentioned some tangible benefits that some of your farmers were seeing, but also I know that it's become more possible, to filter by credentials. So you were talking about the work that your American partners were doing, but do you, how can people find here in the UK? Can they find products with sustainability credentials more easily now when they're sourcing through your site?
So we're looking to replace it on our site in the next 12 months. So not quite yet, but that will be a watch this space. But I think if you think about our fresh produce business, Fresh Direct, our marketing team are so on board with, the importance of sustainability, but equally, they really buy into the story that it tells. So they put a huge amount of work and energy and effort into whenever they're doing anything on a marketing level, highlighting those suppliers that are doing things in the sustainability space. So, and it's never usually a hard message to find, because I think our growers that are doing work in the space and, moving to regenerative practices, or have got, really great trials happening, they want to talk about that, they want to show it off, and then it's much easier for us to then share that with customers. We also do a lot of customer visits, so those customers can actually just speak firsthand with our farmers and our growers and see it for themselves, out in the field, which I think makes such a difference than, just seeing a nice marketing video, as great as they are, and, reading a blurb on a screen. Being able to bring customers to the field, meet the people that are actually growing it. I went down to Bognor Regis a couple of months ago, and our supplier there has brought in tech to listen to the amount of bees that are in the area. In fact, following on the initiatives that they're putting in place in terms of wildflowers and hedgerows. And that's the sort of thing that, again, like I said earlier, captures the hearts and minds, and then makes those customers who are buying through us say, I want to make sure that my produce that I'm buying comes from that specific farm, because I'm really buying into that story. And I think there's such an element of pride that you get from the growers and the farmers that are doing work in this space. And I know even from themselves, they're out there and they're counting the different types of birds and insects that they're seeing. And that kind of even then is kind of giving them really pride in how they're looking after that land, and how we can then kind of keep sharing that with our customers.
That's brilliant. And that takes me quite nicely onto our next section, which is about attracting, retaining customers and consumers, because there's been so much that's come out about the storytelling element of, as you say, with your clients, telling the stories to the clients, and then getting that to the end consumer and the citizens who are buying and eating those food products. when we did some research, we found that, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that, people really loved when you gave them a benefit-led, concise and impactful, tagline or something that really said why you wanted higher welfare or why you wanted this more, wild farm flour. We also did some really interesting research about how highlighting, how you describe products can be really powerful. So we found that if we highlighted sensory benefits could make dishes 4 times more popular. So we did some research where we asked diners about, which kale did they want? And 88% chose a more appealing name over macerated kale, which is how it had been currently described on the menu before we did the research. So how are you, Julia? You harnessing sustainability to win clients, and getting that message down the chain to your consumers. I know that you do some great work with Nestlé. With all your products, are you finding you're changing the way you're marketing?
I think that storytelling piece and really telling the benefit, and you're talking in terms of the nutritional and the sustainability.
Or just the sort of how I get your emails and they come through and they tell, you're very good at pulling out the nutrition story, the sustainability story. Are you finding that that's becoming a really powerful tool for you?
Absolutely, you need to communicate with the right information, factually correct, and storytelling to engage that consumer. So yes, 100% consumers are becoming more interested in understanding the detail behind the products. Functional benefits and emotional benefits are fundamental. So yes, it's critical.
Amazing. So one of the things that came up in the research was the increased kind of discussion around ultra processed foods. When we asked consumers, 73% said that they were still worried about the health impacts of ultra processed foods. And it's a big debate, of course, when over half in the UK, people's calories, over half of them come from ultra processed foods. Emily, when we talked, you mentioned that you had been seeing buying habits slightly changing as a result of this kind of shift. What are you seeing happening from operators? What kind of products are they looking for?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not a nutritionist by any stretch, and I know that sometimes the ultra processed tag is particularly unfairly given to some products. But I think in terms of the conversations I'm having with customers now, and everyone wants to continue moving to a more plant-based offer. But I think there's an element now where the ultra processed conversation has driven a review of those menus to say, do we want to just like for like put a meat replacement on in a burger and say, job done, there's our plant-based offer? I think that conversation, that shift in consumers' habits is driving more creativity with plant-based food, more appetite for different types of produce and more variety, and having them displayed and given in a kind of different way. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that does play into then the marketing of those dishes. And I think when I talk to some of our school customers who, potentially before had meatless lasagna on a ticket on a plate, it doesn't sound great for kids. Whereas now they're talking about, lentils and vegetables and, making it sound good and sound delicious. And it just reflects what's being put into it more so than, I guess, just that like for like replacement before. So I think it's definitely obviously got some negatives in terms of the message is so far out there, and people don't always understand ultra processed and what it actually means. But I think it has definitely driven creativity with operators to say, well, let's have a look at all this amazing whole plant-based options that we could be using instead. And actually we can market that better because we're talking about whole foods that people understand, and hopefully then they'll taste better and we know that the nutrition is better. So I think we're definitely seeing that shift in across all the kind of sectors that we operate in.
And that's a really valuable point you've made, because all ultra processed foods are not the same. And there's been research that's come out now which has shown things like increased cancer risks that can be associated with very high fat, sugar, salt, and animal-based ultra-processed foods don't necessarily, that those findings don't necessarily apply to plant-based or grain-based products. So there seems to be much more information needed in the space. What do you think, Julia, when it comes to what clarity should we be seeking in terms of further research on the impacts and the differences between UPFs?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there is confusion now. And yeah, so you're getting some people referring to these products as ultra-processed foods. The reality is there isn't a widely agreed definition or understanding of what constitutes a food that's highly processed. Certainly at Nestlé, we don't agree that because something's processed, it automatically qualifies as unhealthy. So there is that confusion. So it does need further research, absolutely. What science does very clearly show is that overconsumption of foods high in fat, salt and sugar should be avoided. And I think building on what Emily was saying there in terms of the plant-based, the important thing is that the focus is on the nutritional quality. So the plant-based is essentially replacing the animal-based protein. So it's therefore important that it's a rich source of protein, and then looking for those plant-based products that are low in saturated fat and high in fibre is a great place to start. We know that adults are consuming, in fact, data came out yesterday from the National Diet and Nutrition Survey saying that over 80% of adults are consuming too much saturated fat and 95% not getting enough fibre. So actually, plant-based products being designed to address that criteria, high in fibre and low in saturated fat, is a good thing and a good place to start.
That's quite surprising. I thought this figure was about 9% of adults were getting the recommended amount of fibre. So it looks like it's even more important that people understand the nuances around great ways to get fibre and how plant-rich diets can really help with that. Moving on to addressing food and packaging waste, Dave, we are drowning in regulations. We had a bit of a brief overview, which you kind of gave the once over for me, which I appreciated. But how can we talked a bit earlier about people navigating what's coming in the uncertainty? But if you had sort of one nugget for people, because you gave us some great insight earlier, an additional nugget for people on what they should be doing in this space, in addition to what you said before, I'd be really grateful.
Yeah, look, I think we talked earlier about the value of communication and really trying to take that time to talk and listen. And I think it's essential when it comes to navigating regulation. Uncertainty is the bigger concern that we hear from clients at the moment. And by that, we really mean the lack of clarity from government. The 2018 Resources and Waste Strategy that was published, the truth is very little of that got implemented. Some of the political parties have started to kind of roll back on their commitments to net zero in the transition. The US have pulled out of the Paris Agreement once. Under Donald Trump, they've in the process of signing off the executive order and pulling out of it again. So I think for ESG teams to get the funding they need, investors need certainty. And under the new Labour government, what I would say is we are starting to get the clarity that we need. It doesn't always move as quickly as I'd like, but the Circular Economy Task Force, they are expected to publish a revised strategy later this year. So for everyone watching this event, really, my recommendation would just be keep a really close eye for sort of DEFRA announcements and just keep talking to your supply chain, because that's going to give you that time and space and headspace that we spoke about earlier.
Amazing. Thank you. Emily, you gave me a great example. Food waste, when we talked about the fact that food waste is becoming, measurement and reduction is becoming much more common. But you gave me a really powerful story about how engaging teams in food waste could be really impactful. And tell me about that visit to City Harvest. Do you remember?
Yeah, it was actually FareShare. We work with both and I love them both. But yeah, it was actually with FareShare. So we did a waste walk with them to our Corby depot, and Corby's our largest fresh produce depot. So as you can imagine, fresh produce unfortunately comes with higher wastage just due to the nature of the product. And we did a visit with them and we walked around with the team at Corby. There's an amazing colleague there, Betty, who manages all of the surplus donations every week. And just through kind of having that face-to-face conversation and building the relationships and the connections, we were firstly able to identify further opportunities just on that walk around. So things like prepped veg, Betty just hadn't realised that we could donate that. So that was a really easy fix. And then there was things where we were like, well, actually, we've got some things in our T's and C's with suppliers that we could just change and amend, again, really quick fix, and that would help unlock more surplus. And then the really key thing for us was we got Betty and some of the Corby team out volunteering in a Fair Share site. And that really helped to kind of see where that food is going, understand a bit more from the charity partners who are running that site. And we did that across the network. So all of our depot colleagues had a chance to go into their local Fair Share site across our Purpose Month last November. And they were coming back with all these ideas of like, well, I saw this and I saw this and I saw that the charity needs some more PPE. And, you know, we always have a surplus when people are leaving and we have turnover. So can we donate that? And they were then coming to me with ideas of what we could do better with food waste and with, you know, better support of increased donations of PPE. And that's the sort of thing where, you know, again, you can send out data and I can send out their monthly tonnage that I get, and that does a certain amount of work. But actually getting them out, seeing kind of the benefit, talking to the charities, and just spending that time of just one day out of my kind of calendar and the teams to identify further opportunities, and we managed to reduce, well, increase our donations by like 50% following that visit. So yeah, really worthwhile.
That's amazing. And I know, Julia, we're running a bit low on time. So there was a great example you guys had about this. I loved it. I saw it, met the man who was the genius behind it at the awards, about the amazing coffee machine. So could you just summarize in one sentence what you did there?
Yeah, essentially. So the most important thing is that this is a great example of someone who does not work in sustainability, who came up with an idea to reduce waste, monetary and materials. And essentially, it was this furniture for our Nescafe coffee machines was made of a mix of materials that were single use, were damaged, ended up in landfill. What he did was saw an opportunity to use recycled materials from our factory. So now all the panels in this are made from 70% waste plastic from our Tutbury factory and 30% Nestlé used coffee grounds. So it's a closed loop solution. So yeah, not time to say it anymore, but no, it's brilliant and super good.
And I know, Dave, that we've got there were some great examples about Zizi and Ask redesigning their pizza boxes to manage out loads of waste. So there's so much that's going on there. Just really quickly, I just wanted to we talked a bit about biodiversity and water. And Julia, could you just really quickly tell us about the work that you're doing in water to show what action on water can look like tangibly?
So we have a number of products globally and some in the UK, 4 projects in the UK, which are all about working with the local area and focusing on shared water challenges. So if I give one example, in Derbyshire with the Wildlife Trust, it's a project aiming to improve the water quality and biodiversity. So essentially working to restore the river Ecclesbourne back to its original course. And it's basically allowed an opening of 28 kilometres of river for fish migration, which has meant that vulnerable Atlantic salmon can now return to parts of Derbyshire after actually 100 years absence. So, and there's more projects like that going on.
It's absolutely amazing. When we look at the last section, encouraging creativity, boosting inclusivity, and fostering well-being, there was research found that, we quote, there's a stat in there about that 72% of Gen Z consider an organisation's environmental credentials before joining. Emily, could you just give us, I know you rolled out a company-wide system in a sentence or two. Could you just summarise what you did and how that had an impact? Because I know it had a really big impact on how people felt when dealing with customers.
Yeah, so we initially focused training sessions on our commercial kind of frontline colleagues and our development chefs. So 2 really key teams that are talking to our customers and kind of being the face of the company. And obviously increasingly customers are wanting to know more and more about sustainability and what we're doing as a business. So the training was really to address some of the, I guess, fear they had around, well, oh, sustainability, I couldn't possibly know anything about that. It sounds far too complicated. So just really give them back to basics. What is climate change? What's the impact on food? What is made up in a carbon footprint? Everyone's talking about food miles years ago, and actually I think we've built that knowledge on now. And it was just to really help give them the confidence to host those conversations, be able to answer questions from customers in the first hand, and obviously then myself and Pete there to support if there's anything more extensive. And I think we just really helped to, well, one, get people really interested. I think a lot of people took it into the kind of personal life and what they could change, help them win their day job. And then ultimately we rolled that out on our learning platform to all of our colleagues. So it's not kind of role specific. It's really kind of an introduction to sustainability at its core. We did a healthy and sustainable diets module. And it's really just there to kind of break down some of those barriers in terms of all the acronyms that we all use in our day to day and what do they mean, just so it's a bit more approachable, people can be on board, and then they can bring that into their day job.
And it really, I remember the stats are in the research, but, it rose, people's confidence in dealing questions sort of leapt by sort of 20%, didn't they? How confident they felt and how much they felt their knowledge had improved. There was also some great examples about people looking, ways to supporting like different diverse recruitment and getting diverse talent. So BM had a great example of the Lumery Bakery Training Academy, where they were bringing in women facing domestic violence or social exclusion and sort of training them. And Sodexo has a wonderful starting fresh program for ex-offenders to, looking at ways to fill that talent gap, but also help address social issues at the same time. Julia, again, do you have one line you could give us on some of the work you've been doing on sort of work with students and apprenticeships to kind of help draw those in to help fill the skills gap?
So we have two programs, Top Door, which has been 37 years. So that's students who are already having chosen that they're going into hospitality. We announced our winners for that last week. And then we have our Choose Hospitality Pledge, which is about informing young people about how amazing this industry can be. So one of the initiatives we're doing later this year is going up to York and essentially going to hopefully most of the secondary schools there to do interactive exercises, bringing our customers in to show them what this industry can mean and really inspire them to consider it.
Because it's very important that people understand that food is a great industry, and also if they want to make a difference on climate, it's an amazing space. I am very sorry we have overrun by a couple of minutes, but thank you. The three of you have been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed all your insights and all those like tangible examples of sustainability in practice. It really helps bring it all to life. So please, the report will be out later today. I think it should be landing at about 4:30 into your inbox if you get the Footprint, if you're on the Footprint newsletter. But I hope you enjoy it. Please read it and take action. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts.